In the summer of 1940, the fate of the free world came down to a few hundred exhausted young men in flying boots, most of them barely out of their teens, and a secret their enemy never fully understood. If they lost, German soldiers could be marching through London within weeks. If they held, Hitler's war machine would suffer its very first defeat. This is the story of the Battle of Britain, and of how the impossible odds were beaten by something far cleverer than luck. By June 1940, the war was going catastrophically for the Allies. Germany had torn through Poland, Norway, the Low Countries, and then France with a speed that stunned the world. The British Army had barely escaped annihilation at Dunkirk, pulling some 340,000 men off the beaches, but leaving their tanks and guns behind in the sand. On the 22nd of June, France surrendered. And just like that, Britain stood completely alone. Across a narrow strip of water, the English Channel, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest, Adolf Hitler now controlled the entire coast of occupied Europe. He drew up plans for an invasion, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. Barges were gathered in the Channel ports. Troops began to train. But one problem stood in the way, and every German commander knew it. To carry an army across that water, Germany first had to own the sky above it. As long as the Royal Air Force existed, British fighters and bombers could tear an invasion fleet apart before it ever reached the beaches. So before a single German soldier could set foot in England, the RAF had to be wiped out. The man given that job was Hermann Göring, the flamboyant commander of the Luftwaffe, Germany's Air Force, and in 1940 the most powerful in the world. Göring was supremely confident. His airmen had smashed every enemy they'd faced. He promised Hitler the RAF would be swept from the skies in a matter of days. On paper, he had every reason to believe it. The Luftwaffe could throw somewhere around 2,500 aircraft at Britain. Fighter Command had roughly 600 frontline fighters to stop them. But here's where the story turns, because the number everyone remembers is only half the truth. Yes, the RAF was outnumbered, but Britain's factories were building around 300 brand new fighters every single week, and repair crews were putting another 250 damaged planes back in the air. Aircraft, it turned out, could be replaced almost as fast as they were lost. What could not be replaced quickly were the men in the cockpits. And that one fact, pilots, not planes, would decide everything. The RAF also had two superb fighters, the nimble Hawker Hurricane, which would actually score the most kills of the whole battle, and the elegant, deadly Supermarine Spitfire. Against them, the Germans flew the excellent Messerschmitt 109, a match for anything in the sky. But the 109 had one fatal flaw for this fight. It carried so little fuel that once it reached southern England, a German pilot had only about 10 minutes of combat before he had to turn for home or risk dropping into the sea. And then there was the secret, the thing Göring's intelligence never truly grasped. While the world pictured the Battle of Britain as lone heroes dueling in the clouds, the real weapon was on the ground. Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, the quiet, stubborn head of Fighter Command, nicknamed Stuffy, had spent years building something no other nation had, the world's first integrated air defense network. History remembers it as the Dowding System. Here's how it worked. Along Britain's coast stood a chain of tall radar towers, the first early warning radar network on Earth that could detect German aircraft forming up over France, up to 80 miles away, long before they crossed the water. Once the raiders reached the coast, thousands of civilian volunteers of the Observer Corps tracked them by eye and ear. Every scrap of information flowed by telephone into Fighter Command headquarters, where it was filtered and plotted on a huge map table, then passed down to the groups and sector stations that scrambled the fighters. Radar operators and plotters worked the system on the ground, around the clock. It meant the RAF never had to waste precious aircraft flying blind patrols. They could sit on the ground, fuel and ammunition full, and launch at exactly the right moment to meet the enemy. Speed was everything. From the instant radar caught a raid, the RAF had only minutes to climb to altitude. It was, in effect, the first battle in history fought by a machine made of radar, telephone lines, and human nerves. And the Germans, who dismissed British ground control as clumsy and rigid, never landed the knockout blow on it. The battle itself, dated by the British from the 10th of July to the 31st of October, 1940, unfolded in waves. It began over the Channel, with German attacks on British convoys and ports, probing, testing, trying to bait the RAF's fighters into a fight. Then came a main event. On the 13th of August, a day the Germans called Adlertag, or Eagle Day, the Luftwaffe launched its all-out offensive to destroy the RAF, flying nearly 1,500 sorties. But their intelligence was poor. They bombed airfields that weren't even fighter bases, and Fighter Command kept flying. The fighting reached a savage peak on the 18th of August, a day so brutal it's simply remembered as the hardest day, when both sides suffered their heaviest aircraft losses of the entire battle. Then the Germans made their smartest move. From the 24th of August into early September, the Luftwaffe stopped scattering its blows and went straight for the throat, hammering the airfields and sector stations of No. 11 Group, which guarded London and the vital southeast. This was the crisis. This was the moment the whole thing nearly came apart. Because remember, it was the pilots who couldn't be replaced. In just 2 weeks, over 100 RAF pilots were killed or went missing. Airfields were cratered. Sector stations, the nerve centers of the Dowding System, were being smashed. Exhausted young men were flying 4 and 5 sorties a day, then collapsing beside their aircraft. By the 6th of September, Fighter Command was bending to its breaking point. A few more weeks of this, and the system would collapse, and with it, Britain's last defense. It was against this backdrop, on the 20th of August, that Winston Churchill stood before Parliament and spoke the words that would define these men forever. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. From that day, the RAF's fighter pilots had a name, the Few. And then, with victory almost in their grasp, the Germans threw it away. Late in August, a handful of German bombers, lost in the dark, accidentally dropped their bombs on London, something Hitler had forbidden. In retaliation, Churchill ordered the RAF to bomb Berlin. The raid did little real damage, but it humiliated Göring, who had boasted that no enemy bomb would ever fall on the German capital. Enraged, Hitler made a fateful choice. He ordered the Luftwaffe to stop attacking Fighter Command's airfields and turn its full fury on London itself. On the 7th of September, bombs fell on the city in daylight for the first time, the beginning of what Britain would call the Blitz. For London's people, it was the start of a terrible ordeal. But for the RAF, it was salvation. The pressure lifted off the shattered airfields at the exact moment they were about to fail. Sector stations were repaired. Broken squadrons caught their breath. Fighter Command, days from collapse, was handed the time it needed to recover. The Germans had traded a target that could win them the war for one that couldn't, and the RAF made them pay for it. The climax came on the 15th of September. Convinced the RAF was down to its last few planes, the Luftwaffe launched its largest, most concentrated daylight assault on London. Around 1,500 aircraft, a hammer blow meant to finish Fighter Command once and for all. This time, the RAF was ready and waiting. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park threw in every squadron he had. When Churchill, watching from the underground operations room, asked what reserves were left, Park gave an answer that still echoes. There are none. But there didn't need to be. Wave after wave of German bombers was broken up and driven back. Instead of empty skies, the Luftwaffe ran into a fighter command that seemed as strong as ever. And that single day shattered the entire assumption their strategy rested on. Now, here's a myth worth clearing up. Britain triumphantly announced that 185 German aircraft had been shot down that day. It made headlines around the world. The real figure was closer to 56 or 60. In the chaos, both sides wildly overclaimed. But the exact number almost didn't matter. What mattered was the message. The Luftwaffe could not break the RAF, and its own losses were becoming impossible to sustain. 2 days later, on the 17th of September, 1940, Hitler quietly postponed Operation Sea Lion until further notice. The invasion barges were dispersed. The invasion never came. That date, the 15th of September, is still remembered every year as Battle of Britain Day. And one more myth deserves correcting. The idea that this was purely an English victory, won by a handful of plucky locals. In truth, the few were an international force. Just under 3,000 aircrew flew in the battle, and around a fifth of them weren't British at all. Poles, Czechs, Canadians, and airmen from 13 nations. The Polish pilots in particular fought with such ferocity that Dowding himself later said that without their contribution, he hesitated to say the outcome would have been the same. And behind every pilot stood tens of thousands of others. The ground crews patching planes overnight, the observers, the plotters, the factory workers. The few were never truly alone. The Battle of Britain didn't win the war, but it was the first time Hitler's Germany was stopped. The first great defeat of a war it had been winning everywhere else. Britain survived, and because it survived, it stayed the island fortress from which, for years later, the liberation of Europe would be launched. A few hundred young men in a summer sky had changed the course of history. Not with luck, but with courage, sacrifice, and a quiet genius no one else had thought of. Thanks for watching. Is channel par AC or stories aati rahengi. Attached raho. Milte hai next story mein.